This is the full set review for Modern Horizons 3 for the purposes of drafting. I'm going to be reviewing every card in the set as common and uncommon, and in regards to how you should be picking it and how well it will be draft and how well it will play in your events. For this review, we're going to be using the Scuffle review system. So that means that every card is going to have a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. A 1 being a card you should never play, a 2 is a card you should try not to play, 3 is replaceable, 4 is a solid card, 5 is a strong card, 6 is a card you will play in a given color or deck, 7 is a card that pulls you into that deck. It's a reason to be in that color. 8 is a card that you should do work to play, maybe something you splash or change how your deck is built to make work. 9 is a card that when you see this card, you're going to be this color. 10 is a card you will always play. And generally, you want to try not to have too many 1s, 2s, or 3s. 4s, 5s, and 6s are going to be the majority of your deck, hopefully. 7s, 8s, and 9s are good. They are cards you are happy to have. Cards also have a floor value. That's the worst a card will be. A ceiling value. That's the best a card will be. And then the amount of effort required to bridge that gap. So the purposes of this review system is to help you draft like you rather than have a strict rating. That number is going to help guide your picks, just the total number. But lots of cards will have a very high ceiling or a very low floor that they will start at, and then you're going to have to put other cards into your deck to get cards to your ceiling. You want to have as high a value as possible. So we're also going to, since today is the blue cards and the red cards, we're also going to be talking about the archetypes and how to best make use of the cards. And for Modern Horizons 3, because this is a really complex and difficult set, I'm also going to give you a general priority pick order for the types of cards that you need for each archetype. So it's going to be pretty snappy. I'm going to try and do the other two colors soon, possibly tomorrow morning if I can figure out the timing. Otherwise, maybe not even late tonight. We will see. I have a few things that I need to get done. Worst case scenario, it will be Sunday. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I just need to let Tyra know. All right. So, we're going... Do we want to start with red or with blue? Let's start with blue. Yeah? Yeah. All right. We're going to do blue cards and then red cards. So, for blue cards... Oops. Here we go. Just changing how I'm centered a little bit. All right. So, there are 4... All right, sorry about that. So, the 4 blue color pairs. We talked about blue-white energy a lot yesterday because we did the white cards. But in general, you're going to need to prioritize your answers first, interaction, bounce spells, removal. Then the sinks for energy, places to put your energy where it will work well, where it doesn't most work for you. Because there's not a ton of great ones in blue-white, so you need to pick them pretty high. Then you need evasion, things with flying to take advantage of these little ways to pump spells. It's a good way to close out the game. And there's, some bestow cards. It makes use of the cards that you're going to have to pick up late a lot of the time. And then your energy generators. A lot of your cards in blue and white just kind of generate energy on their own. There's not a lot of repeated ways to generate energy, but there's a lot of ways to generate energy one time efficiently. There's some powerful engines you can build out, and you might even splash red for that. There's a lot of ways to grow your flyers. However, blue and white overall has the weakest removal, so that's why you have to pick it so high. Blue-red is billed as blue-red energy engines, but you don't have to be energy-based. There's lots of cards like the Cyclops Superconductor that are a bridge between prowess and energy, and you're fine being very aggressive or attacking a lot, and you're also fine building up your energy over time in order to use it late. So if you want to be a blue-red deck, whether you're energy or prowess, then you start out with cheap removal, and then you want your flexible creatures first. Those are the ones that are going to fit into whatever blue-red deck you're in. Often they're going to be rares, but like this Cyclops Superconductor is a great bridge between prowess and energy. It works well with energy, but it also works by itself too, because it makes 3 energy and it spends 3 energy. Then you need your specific creatures, and then you need your card advantage. So this deck wants a lot of very cheap red and blue spells and gets the most out of the cheap red and blue spells. You do kind of want to So you get a lot of extra advantages from leaning harder into red or leaning harder into blue. Blue just has so much card draw. Red has a lot of cards that are very heavy on the red mana values. And either way, that lean will be worth something to you. It'll make your deck a little bit more efficient. You should also figure out the extent to which you are playing your deck at instant speed, whether that's with counter spells, bounce spells on your opponent's turn, or there's a lot of ways that the instant speed cards in blue and red don't mesh well with the sorcery speed cards in blue and red. So like, we'll talk a lot about the Deem Unworthies, the sorcery speed stuff, but like there's a lot of sorcery speed cards that want you to draw a lot of cards on your turn, or maybe exile the cards from top of your library that you can cast in this turn, but those don't interact well with instants. And in general, counter spells are a little bit weak in this set. There's a few, but they're not as strong as we've seen even in some of the more recent sets. And then just decide whether you're going to be prowess or energy sooner rather than later. You'll get a lot more value out of that way. You can bridge that gap. Like, you can be a prowess energy deck, but you need a lot of cards to make it work right. Blue-black draw 3 control. So you have a lot of bonuses in blue-black for drawing your third card in a turn. And what this means is, like, there are a few instant speed ways to draw 3 cards on your opponent's turn, but it's much more likely you'll be able to make this work with a draw two cards sorcery on your own turn. However, you are a control deck first and a draw 3 deck second. There's a lot of good ways to just draw 2 cards at a time or draw 2 cards at instant speed, which means that your pick order prioritizes removal first, then the bombs, and it's not necessarily like a rare bomb, but a way to close out the game or top things off. Then your card draw, then your engine, and that's just in order of rarity, how much you need. Most of the actual removal is going to come from black, but there's a few good blue removal spells if you're playing at sorcery speed. And then you want to try and establish an engine, some way to generate value past just drawing cards, because it's at a certain point in this format it becomes really difficult to get enough value just from drawing the cards, as opposed to establishing an engine, maybe like a sneaky snacker. Like, if you can loot, if you have a way to draw a card, discard a card, and you're discarding sneaky snackers, it's a lot better than just casting these flyers. You can also go more tempo oriented, like put down your early flyers and attack with them in order to, and then just clear the way for them over and over again. It works really good, really well. So figure out what you're doing on your opponent's turn. Figure out how you're blocking. You don't necessarily need these sneaky snackers to block. There's good ways to block, but you need to think about it. Like, if you let your opponent attack with their 5 power creatures without any kind of defense, then you're going to lose. And this isn't a format where you can kill everything. You can't have enough removal to kill all of your opponent's cards, which means you do need to have creatures and you do need to block when you're playing blue-black. And then lastly, blue-green Eldrazi ramp. So you need to pick your interaction first. It's hard to get enough interaction in blue and green, but there's some good cheap spells. You need to find your ramp second, and then big creatures, and then small creatures. So in blue-green, compared to the other Eldrazi decks, you need actual colorful mana. So like red-green gets away with not running that many colorful mana sources. Blue-green needs to run actual forests, actual islands, and then you can get your waste mana from cards like the Snapping Voidcraw. It taps for 2 wastes, but that's only after you have green-blue. There's some powerful ramp spells, but they are specific to blue-green, and it's a good idea to think of how you are ramping, because if you're ramping with lots of Eldrazi Scions, then you can pull value from those Eldrazi Scions by growing them, or by just turning them into high-value creatures. And then you also need to figure out, do you need to draw cards, and where are your cards coming from? Some decks don't. Some decks just have powerful enough creatures that your opponent will have to spend multiple cards to deal with it. That's card advantage. Sometimes Annihilator on your big Eldrazi is good card advantage. And then sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes you have just solid bodies at 5 mana 5/5s or 6 mana 6/6s, and you need to draw enough cards outside of that to get those cast. All right, we're going to start with the cards, but I just realized I'm taking my allergy meds today. All right. So, first card of the day, we have Aetherspike. It's choose target spell, you get 2 energy, and then you can pay any amount of energy. So, at its floor, this card is 2 mana, counter target spell unless your opponent pays 2. But if you manage to cast this when your opponent only has 1 mana up, then you get to gain an energy. You get to net an energy from this. However, in this format, People are going to have mana up a reasonable amount of the time. Maybe they're trying to hold up mana to adapt a creature. Maybe they just have some Eldrazi Scions left over. Maybe they played a War and Power Stone and they have 7 mana, but they're trying to play an 8-drop. That makes this a little worse. It's cheap, efficient interaction, but it's not always going to counter a given spell. If you are a heavy energy deck, like you might say, well, my opponent's 4 mana up and I can pay 5 energy to counter that spell. Well, 5 energy is a real cost. Then this isn't a 2 mana counter spell anymore. This is a 2 mana plus 3 energy counter spell. So it's good when you have enough card draw that you can just keep running it. But it's not always going to counter what you needed to counter. And then in this format, there are a lot of 7 and 8 mana spells that you are going to want to counter even late into the game that your opponent's going to try and play on turn 7 or turn 8. But those spells have value on the cast trigger. So I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3, ceiling of 6. I might even drop it, but it's efficient removal on turn 2. In a deck that just doesn't have that much to do on turn 2, you're not going to be too upset about taking it. I'm going to go ahead and drop this. Like, it doesn't counter the spell quite often enough for me to be happy to play this. Okay, up next we've got Bespoke Battle Wagon. This is a really good, it both produces a lot of energy and then uses energy really well. So if it taps to make 2 energy the turn it comes down, which then lets it either tap a creature or gets you 2/3 of a card. And tapping for 2/3 of a card is a little much for 4 mana, which is why that floor is a 4. But if this isn't an energy deck, then this is likely going to get to draw a card the turn it comes down. And you can also just pass. So if you are a really dedicated energy deck, then you get to do multiples of these things. So like if you have 4 energy the turn this comes down, then you get to pass. Your opponent attacks. You can pay 4 energy to make it an artifact creature and still block and then block with it. If it's not summoning stick, you can block with it and make 2 energy in the same turn, or block with it and draw a card in the same turn. So this is great as an earlier pick because it puts you into the energy deck. There's this kind of disconnect in a lot of the energy cards between the cards that produce the energy and the cards that spend the energy. Cards tend to either spend energy really well or produce energy really well with not a lot in between. This is one of the few cards that does both, and so it has a very high rating. I'll be pretty happy to pick this up early for any given energy deck. It is okay outside of energy deck, but in general, this is one of the most important cards in a given energy deck. Brain Surge. So I did come back to this one a few times. I gave it a 5. This is one of the better card draw spells in this format. So I gave it a 5, floor of 4, ceiling of 6. And you might, if you've ever played with Brainstorm in Pauper or Legacy, you might notice that it's a lot better in Legacy than in Pauper. Brainstorm is draw 3, put 2 cards back. But Brainstorm does not net you any cards. Brain Surge does net you 2 cards, and there are fetches. Exactly. Well, there's 5 rare fetches and then 10 common fetches. There are 15 available fetch lands in this pack, and you are very likely to have a fetch land in every pack. So this card, if it's 3 mana, draw 4, put 2 back, that's solid card draw at instant speed. You get to pass the turn, end step, draw 4, and keep the most important ones. Like, that's a lot of card selection with nothing else. However, if you have the fetch land, you get to draw 4, put 2 back, and then shuffle them away. Like, 3 mana, draw 4, discard 2 at instant speed is very good. And that's what it ends up being if you have the fetch lands. So the common fetch lands are replace a basic land I don't think it works like that this set. So basic lands are replaced by a common in 50% of the packs, and then it is more likely to be a fetch land, but it doesn't have, or it's more likely to be a land, but it doesn't have to be a land. It's very weird this time. And in addition to that, they are also appear in the common slot. So like you'll have packs with 3 common fetches in them, or more. You can have 5 common fetch packs, but it ends up working like because they are 10 commons with an extra seeded chance. It works really well. You can get 4 to 5 fetches in a pack ranger. It happens. But honestly, it's not the worst thing in sealed. Like I'll play in sealed, which will play a little slower. I'll pretty happily just play all the colors. Up next, consigned to memory. Okay, so Sagas is the last one. Consigned to memory is gonna get a revisit. I almost want to bump it up to a 4. So counter target triggered ability or colorless spell. This is one of the few ways to counter an Eldrazi spell. This is 1 mana counter target devoid or Eldrazi spell, or some of the artifacts, but not all. You can also pay 2 mana to counter target Eldrazi spell and its cast trigger with the same card. So this ends up being a better answer against the Eldrazi deck or a lot of the other ones. And you can do some kind of wacky things. So it counters living weapon. When your opponent plays a living weapon, you can pay 1 blue so that they don't get the germ and they'll have to pay to equip. You can also counter saga triggers. Like if your opponent puts a lore counter on it, you get to counter that ability. So like it does counter Eldrazi very well. You really want it against those Eldrazi decks to the point where I'm considering raising the ceiling. And then it's not the end of the world if you have to include it in your blue deck by default. I'm gonna raise the floor and the ceiling, but I'm keeping the score. So if you have to include it in your deck, there's lots of good ways to loot it away when you can't use it. Or you can loot it away, and there's targets in most decks. Yes, exactly, Ranger, which is not a ton, but it's good against sagas specifically. And we will try and keep an eye out on what it counters. Up next, Copy Crook. So 4 mana clone comes in a play. So it has been good in the past. Clone tends to be reasonable in draft sets because it is always the best creature in play, and then Copy Crook ends up being better than the best creature in play because it connives. However, in this format, there's so many creatures that don't work on their own, or that work. It does kind of sagas. So there are Copy Crook. Most of the things that there's situations where it's bad. So if this were in other sets, we'd be really happy to have it. 4 mana clone tends to be good because it is the best card in the pack or on the battlefield. But and then you can like blink it and change what it is later. And connive is real. Being able to connive on every attack, that's a very powerful ability. But in this set, if you're like an aristocrats deck or an affinity deck or a aristocrats, affinity, modified, all of those decks are very happy to have a Copy Crook on the other side of the table, because all of those decks get so much more out of the synergy between the cards or being in a specific deck that you're not likely to get the full value of the card that you clone. And the large creatures that you have access to in this set are good because they have cast triggers, which you don't get on Copy Crook. It comes in without exactly Ranger. You don't get the ETB, like you don't get the cast trigger. So when you play Copy Crook, you have to self-enable it. You have to run your own cards to copy. And that's awkward because that means that you need powerful 3-drops. That's not impossible, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be picking Copy Crook before I have those cards. If I have those cards, I will be very happy to play the Copy Crook, which is why it has a high effort value. But I gave it a 3, and it's usually going to play near that floor of the 3. It's always going to be a copy of the best single card on the table. But this is a format where the best single card is not likely to be as impactful as in other formats. It is nice that it's bigger than the best spell at the table. But it's not good on its own. Up next, we have Corrupted Shapeshifter. So I almost gave this a none grade, all 4s, like that white card yesterday. But it always is going to be 5. Like, sometimes you really do need, a 4 mana 3/3 flyer is bad. A 4 mana 2/5 vigilance is bad. 4 mana 0/12, solid. Like, there's a lot of creatures that this is the only thing in the format that they can block. But, like, you're still not happy with that body. And you're not going to play this much outside. You're not going to play this happily outside of the Eldrazi deck, but there are rare ways to blink this that make you a little bit happier, because then you get to start out with a 2/5 vigilance and swap it when you need it. The shapeshifting is nice but not strong, so this card is always just going to be fine. And it's going to be fine. Like, you're not going to be upset when you have to play it. All right, up next we have Deem Inferior. So This it reads as 4 mana, tuck a spell. It reads as 4 mana, tuck a permanent, and it is any permanent. Since it's not on top, you have some time to prepare for it. This gets rid of a spell, a permanent, for 2 turns. You have 2 turns to deal with it. You have to be a little careful because your opponent might get a cast trigger when it comes back, but it is not hard to make this card powerful. It's actually only 3 mana. 3 mana tuck is fine. It's not good, but it is the only removal spell you really have available in blue that deals with a permanent in play. However, if you're drawing cards, there's so many ways. Like the next card we're gonna look at draws 2 cards. There's so many ways to just draw 2 cards, and then this is 1 blue mana to tuck. And what you'll have a lot of times in these blue decks that are drawing a ton of cards, that draw 3 cards for the turn or 4 cards for the turn, is then they don't have anything else to do. If you pay 5 mana to draw 3 cards, that's a fine rate, but then what else are you doing with your turn? Well, Demon Inferior lets you spend your turn to draw 3 cards, and then you can cast 2 of them, play a land. This is a really excellent removal spell in blue. That floor of a 4, that's if you're only ever paying 3 mana for it. But if you're paying 1 or 2 mana for this card, you're gonna be really happy. And if you get a deck together with 6 copies of Demon Inferior, then you will play all 6 copies. You can tuck your own permanents, you just won't too often. But there's a chance with the card draw deck that you mill yourself out. There are ways to pick up your spells. Demon Inferior, with a creature that picks up a spell, keeps you from decking, which is niche. It doesn't affect the rating. It's just something I want to point out because it will end up feeling very important in a few of those games. All right, up next we have Deep Analysis. This is a reprint into Modern, one of my favorite cards from Torment. 4 mana, draw 2, kind of weak. 2 mana, pay 3 life, draw 2. What? This is not bad. It's a Night's Whisper. So it's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 5. This is a 4/4/1. It's 6 mana. So 6 mana, draw 4 cards. That is a card called Opportunity. That's reasonable rate. This card, that would not be good enough in this set. However, Deep Analysis lets you trigger your Sneaky Snackers. It lets you return a Sneaky Snacker to play twice. You get to trigger your cards that care about drawing 3 cards twice with 1 card. And you also want it in a lot of the other decks just for your card flow. It's good card advantage. In addition, you get to, if you have a lot of cards that are draw a card, discard a card, discarding the Deep Analysis is something you want to do. You want to if you draw a card, discard a card, and it's Deep Analysis, then you flash it back, well, then it's basically like Madness. So you can get a 3-for-1 out of this card pretty consistently. It's solid card draw. It's a little slow. You want to have a few ways to loot it, but none of that is hard in blue, so I gave it a 5, which is also the ceiling of this card, and it's usually going to play at that ceiling of a 5. 3 life is not nothing, so this is not a free 2 mana draw 3. This is a relatively fast 4-bat, so just do note that the flashback costs 3 life. All right, Depth Defiler. So this is the highest rated blue card so far, and one of the highest rated blue cards here. If this is a 5 mana 3/5 with either mode, then that's very good. 5 mana 3/5, draw 2, discard a card. That's great. 5 mana 3/5, bounce a creature. That's also great. And you can kick it to do both. If you kick it, you get to do both. You can, it doesn't say return another target creature. It can target it's on cast. It is on cast, so if your opponent counters it, you still get the effect. You get to bounce a creature before this comes into play, which has some niche uses, and you get to draw 2 cards. It is either pro tempo or pro card advantage, or both, and it is cheap enough. This at 5, at 4 and at 5, those are the Eldrazi that need to keep you alive in the Eldrazi decks. So you'll play this in the Eldrazi decks, but you'll play it in the other decks too. Just the Eldrazi deck's a lot more likely to kick it. And you don't need wastes to play this card. Compared to the other Eldrazi, you only need blue mana. The waste is just for the kicker. And you want to be able to kick it ideally, but it's still going to be a 6 if you can't kick it. And the body is really good. I didn't talk about it much yesterday, but 5 toughness is the magic number. If we go over to, one sec. I don't know why I got rid of this slide. So there are a ton of spells that deal 4 damage. I actually feel like I may have even... There's 5 spells that deal 4 damage in red alone. And that kills 83% of creatures. So 5 toughness is the magic number. You want your 5 drops to have 5 toughness at least. Very strong Eldrazi. All right, up next, we've got the Drownyard Lurker. This card looks good. It's just weaker than all of the other things Eldrazi are doing. So, like, it's a 7-mana 7/7 that makes a spawn on cast. That's a weak top end. 3-mana, like, the option of being this is a giant Eldrazi or this is a 3-mana ramp spell is nice. And it's playable. But you have better things to do with 7 mana in the Eldrazi deck, and you have better ramp spells at 3 than the Eldrazi deck. This is still good when you care about drawing a certain number of cards a turn, or when you care about discarding cards, having things in your graveyard. Like, there are some good reanimation spells, and you will still, if you cycle this for an Eldrazi spawn and then reanimate it, then you still got the Eldrazi spawn there. So, like, that's that ceiling of a 6 is when we're doing some graveyard shenanigans. But, like, this is better in blue-black than it is in the Eldrazi deck. Exactly. Like, that's exactly right, Ranger. Red has multiple deal 4s for 3 mana or less. You really don't want your 5-drop to die to that. But yeah, this Drownyard Lurker is fine. And it is one of the reasons that going into the Eldrazi deck is kind of safe, because, like, you may not always get your Depth Defilers or your big colorless Eldrazi, but you can count on getting a few of these. It's just not very strong. Alright, Electrozoa. So, honestly, this is not as big a drawback as you might think. It's a 3-mana 3/1 flying with flash. If you do it on your opponent's end step, this gets to by itself attack 2 times, which is 6 damage on a 3-drop. You're happy. There's a few 1/1 white spirits, but there's no real way to punish this card. There's no ping. And exactly, this is also a removal spell. Deal 3 damage to an attacking creature, or maybe you can pump it. But, like, all of those are going to be average in a dedicated energy deck. You're pretty happy to deal 3 damage to an attacking creature, gain 2 energy. Like, that is a fine use of this card. But it's going to feel like filler in that deck most of the time. There are a lot of good ways to capitalize on this. There's a few good tempo decks, but there's not a lot of good ways. So, like, there's no cancel. Like, there's no 3-mana spell. So cards like these tend to do really well in sets where you're holding up mana on your opponent's turn anyway. Blue is not incentivized to hold up mana on your opponent's turn in this format. You're incentivized to draw 3 cards, which is easier to do on your turn. You're incentivized to cast additional spells, which is easier to do on your turn. You're incentivized to cast giant spells, which is easier to do on your turn. So this card would be better in a set where there is more to do with 3 mana at instant speed or with flash. However, you can build a deck that does that. You can build a deck that holds up Brain Surge or Consign to Memory and then cast an Electrozoa instead. But a lot of the cards that do that are going to be at uncommon and rare. So it's something you fall into more than force. So I gave it a 4. It's got a floor of 3. That's if you are not good at producing energy and don't need the flyer. But that ceiling of a 5, that's in an energy deck where you're trying to tempo them out. You're trying to just put down flyers so that you can kill them before they kill you. So, like, you can get a pretty good blue-black flyers deck together. Sneaky Snacker and Electrozoa. That's solid. I'd be pretty happy with that deck. But it's not great on its own as opposed to this Embercool's Messenger. This card is nutty. Wow, she's scary looking. So, 2-mana 2/1 flying. That's good. That's good on its own. It doesn't mesh that well with the Eldrazi if it doesn't have this second line of text. But whenever you draw your second card each turn, not third, just second, create an 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn. That's really good. And that means that is so much easier to trigger in your opponent's turn. So there's lots of ways to draw 2 at instant speed. And there's lots of ways to draw 1 at sorcery speed. So this card is not hard to trigger. And if you trigger this 0 times, it's still a 2/1 flyer. If you trigger this 1 time, you're extremely happy. And it's one of the reasons that this Drown Yard, like this card with this card, are really good together. A turn 2 Emrakul's Messenger, turn 3 cycle a Drown Yard Lurker, make 2 Eldrazi spawns, draw a card. You get to untap with 5 mana on turn 3 in your, or with 6 mana on turn 4 in your mono blue deck. Yes, I like that. Like, you can get a good Treasure Storm deck together, Ranger. This is a very strong card. I tied it with the Depths Defiler, and it's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 7. Just so efficient, but this is an efficient, tempo-oriented flyer that attacks really well and aids the ramp plan. It's still solid if you draw it in the late game because it blocks really well too. Like, it attacks in the air and makes a blocker every turn, even if you're not ramping. This is the best blue 2-drop. And one of the best blue cards at Uncommon. I tied it with the Depth Defiler for best blue card. All right, up next we've got Hydroelectric Specimen. This one's a little awkward, but so much fun. You can do some kind of crazy things. So there's a lot of deal 3, and you get to pool, like, this on a land is a reasonable body. Like a 3-mana 1/4 flash blocks pretty well. It blocks 2 2s and 3 3s and 2 1s. And it eats combat tricks. You are more likely to, in this format, you're more likely to use this to pull a pump spell off of your opponent's creature than you are to steal a removal spell that is targeting one of your creatures. So it's better with pump spells than it is with protecting your creatures, but it's not a bad way to protect your creatures. And it's usually gonna, like, I'm usually gonna be happy to play this when I need my MDFCs. Like, if you can't steal a spell with it, it's just hard to keep mana up for that kind of thing. Then you're okay playing this as a blocker. When you need a 3-mana 1/4, you need a 3-mana 1/4. But being any kind of relevant spell that I'm not upset to play on an MDFC is going to be at least a 5. Yeah, so Ranger, the Storm is really cool in this format. Like, I don't know if you heard me talking about this colorless creature yesterday. This thing, the Glaring Fleshraker. Like, I had a game where I had this out and I got to cast 4 2-drops. 4 2-mana Eldrazi on turn 4. Like, you can do some wacky things. Just fill your board up. All right, up next we have this messed up snake. This card might be the worst card in the whole format for all players. Like, this card is going to make people quit drafting. It's very good, but it's more annoying than good. And it's you have to know about this card, because when your opponent has blue 2 up, you're going to have to wait a turn to play your spells because you're going to need 1 more mana. And when you have no good cards in hand, you are going to just hold up blue 2 and act like you have this. It's so obnoxious to have your spell tax 1. Right. And if you get, like, we are so far, this is a 3-mana 2/2 flash flying. Like, if that's all this is, that's okay. You'll play a flash flyer for 3. If you get to counter 1 spell with this, you're going to be ecstatic, and your opponent is going to concede. This card is going to cause more concessions than any card in the format. And the existence of this card makes... Way to go. Electrozoa is better because this card exists. Because there's going to be a pause when you have 3 mana up and your opponent is going to have to play around Hope Ender Codal. It's almost always going to play at that ceiling. You have to know this card exists. Full stop. Like, if there's one thing you take away from blue, know that this card is in this format. At Uncommon. Alright, up next we've got Kozilek's Unsealing. This is a powerful build around. You have to build around it. Like, when is this card good? This card is good if it draws you 3 cards and makes 2 Scions. If it only draws you 3 cards, that's not really worth taking a turn off. And if it only makes you Scions, I don't know. That's actually probably worth it at 4 Scions on a delay, or 6 Scions on a bigger delay. Okay, Ranger, I would play Salt Spewer Codal. Also, that tracks. Salt Spear Codal works for that card. All right, Kozilek's Unsealing. Card is very powerful in this set. You have to build around it. If you get one late, like if you get a pick 10 or pick 11 Kozilek's Unsealing in pack 1, that is a reason to switch colors and archetypes. But if you open it pack 1, pick 1, I'd still probably give it a try and force it. Like, this card either does nothing or is the best card in your deck. And I'm gonna drop the floor to a 2. Yes, this is an entire build around game plan uncommon, which I love. I love it when you get cool build arounds at uncommon. And I'll be very happy to build around it. So like, this is the card that makes Depth Defiler important. You really want both of these. And it also makes this Corrupted Shapeshifter a lot better. Like, Corrupted Shapeshifter is a bad rate on its own. If it's a 4-mana 3/3 that also makes 2 Scions, you're really happy. And you have to build around this carefully. Like, you can't just cram in 5 7-drops. You'll lose. You can't cram in 5 mana spells and up. But like, if you have a lot of good 4-drops, you'll be fine. And if you have a lot, you need your early spells to make Scion. You need your middle spells to be Kozilek's Unsealing. You need your late spells to be variably costed expensive creatures. But this is going to be a really fun one to build around. Petrifying Meddler, really good with Kozilek's Unsealing. Generally a powerful 5-drop because it buys you time. This is a card that buys you a lot of time. 5 mana, it has the 5 toughness. It has the, it has reach. It has secret reach. That's really important. And it stuns something. And this is also a format where you can move and proliferate stun counters. So like, the stun counter is worth a little extra. That wasn't enough to bump its ceiling. It's just worth noting. But this deals with an attacker for a turn and blocks well, and that's what you need in most of your blue decks. There are better things to top your curve with, which kind of makes me want to drop this a little bit, but I am pretty happy with it most of the time. I'm going to go ahead and give it a revisit because we might be in a format where 5 is not a good cost for things. You might just want 4 and 6 drops in a lot of these decks. So I'm going to give it a revisit. We might end up dropping the 4 and the rating. But it's a solid card, and it's usually going to do the blocking that you need it to do, and without being a terrible attacker. Reefworm. So, this card is really cool. Compared to other formats that have had a Reefworm in it. Exactly, Ranger. That's exactly right. Reefworm as a 4-mana 0/1. It's hard to punish this. There's not that many O-rings or exile target creatures, and there's not that many pings, but there's a lot of ways to really benefit this. Yeah, so this is a reprint from Commander, but like, there are populate cards in this set. There are ways to populate your 9/9 Kraken token. There are sack owlets in this set. This is a creature that produces 4 bodies for 1 card. Like, if you're an Aristocrats deck, you can splash Reefworm, and then this will be 4 bodies for you. And then you can make 4 bodies with it, return it to play, make 4 more bodies. You do have to say release the Kraken when the 6/6 dies. It's true. It is a rule, and I will be enforcing it. Yes, you can populate any size of this and it will work. And like, the thing is, the reason the floor is so low and the reason that there's some effort in is your opponent doesn't have to interact with the Reefworm. If you play Reefworm and you don't have a way to sack it, your opponent will just leave it be. However, a living weapon is a way to sack it. A bestow creature is a way to sack it. You just have to turn this into a creature that must be blocked, and then your opponent will eventually have to block it. There are ways to punish this, but they're really few, and they're mostly in blue. So like, your opponent can deem inferior this card, and you're upset, and your opponent can deem inferior the tokens that it makes, and you're upset. But that's about it. Like, you have this card is best when combined with black cards that let you sacrifice it, or white cards that let you make it larger. And don't be afraid to burn your own Reefworm in response to your opponent's removal spell. But I'll be really excited to play with this. This is also a great card for splashing. But they aren't in this set, Wingspear. There's 1 red card that exiles and 1 white card that exiles, full stop. Like, there are way fewer exiles in this set than in other sets. Which is, like, even in OTJ, this would have been a 2 in OTJ. This card is so hard to get off the battlefield to the graveyard. If they dog umber this, there might be a black exile, but I haven't looked at all of the black rares yet. And I haven't quite finished the black uncommons. That's why we're only doing 2 colors today. I didn't finish the black cards. I got really absorbed and I'm like, shit, why did it take me 4 hours to do the green and blue cards? And the answer is because when I did them yesterday, I missed all the devoid cards. I had to go back and reevaluate everything in relation to the devoid cards. Yes, I don't count rares, Ranger, just because I haven't read them all. I like being surprised at pre-releases, so I do all the rares later, and like, every once in a while that messes with the ratings, but I'm pretty confident it won't for this set, because the rares that I have seen are very bad. The rares are really surprisingly bad, which is awesome. Great set design. I want rares to be bad. There might be Wing Spear, but there's not that many exiles at common, at least. I went through all the commons. And like, you can dog umber this, but if your opponent is playing a dog umbra, you're gonna be fine because you can still kill it yourself later. You can still sacrifice it, and you can blink it, and you can bounce it. So like, I like rares when they add to the format, but like, I'll be, you know, like, you can get Green Storm in this set with an Emerald Medallion. That's cool as hell. That's a great use of rares. And you can get Black Aristocrats because there are really good sack outlets at rare. There's cool things to do with the graveyard at rare. But yeah, Reform is better in this set than in other sets, and it will play better than it looks, and it looks pretty good. So I gave it a 5. That floor of a 3 is if you paid 4 mana for an 0-1 that they deal with. And it's not free. It's not, these tokens aren't free. You have to put effort into it. You have to grow your creature, but there's lots of good ways to do that. You can bestow it. You have to grow it or sack it. I'm going to be excited to just use it as fodder. That's right. You cannot expect, so Ranger, you can't expect to block with it. However, a lot of the ways that people have of getting around O1s is to wipe the board. To get everything -2, to deal 2 damage to everything. So like, if anything, this is a way to hedge against your opponent's sweeper that deals 2 damage to everything. Yes, you can't expect to block with it. You need to either sacrifice it or find a way to attack with it. And there are a lot of good ways to attack with it. Every color outside of blue grants a way to attack with Reform. Royal Cartographer. So this is the 3rd very powerful blue card. Compared to the other energy cards, this one is both an incredibly good way to generate energy and an incredibly good way to spend energy. It ends up acting like a bridge card, so you don't have, the card is best in the energy deck, but you don't have to be an energy deck for this card to be good. It really is dreamy. I love this one. Sorry I didn't say hi earlier. I only answer questions between cards unless I get distracted, because I do that easily. But yes, love this card, love the art, love the flavor text, love both abilities. Yes, exactly, Ranger. This is a 2-drop that you're happy to draw late in the game, and like, generally there's an issue with landfall cards where whenever so this card, you'll get the most landfall triggers if you play it on turn 2. But if you play this on turn 8 in an energy deck, yeah, you lose those landfall triggers, but you also get to spend that energy to draw 3 cards. And landfall is good in this format. There's a lot of common fetch lands and ways to trigger landfall additional times. That floor of a 5, that's if you're not the energy deck. Because if you're not the energy deck, this is a bad turn 8 draw. If you're not the energy deck, you want this to be a 2-mana 1/3 blocker on turn 2 that generates value over the course of the game and becomes an ancestral recall. That is really powerful. And if you are the energy deck, then you pick this right away. And if you want to be the energy deck, you can pack 1, pick 1 this card, and you'll be very happy. I gave it a 7 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of an 8. It's going to be an 8 in a dedicated energy deck, because as I keep saying, your energy deck is as good as the best way to spend energy. This is one of the best ways to spend energy. It's also very good. It's going to play like a 7 or a 6 in the draw 3 cards deck, or the more controlling decks that are running all the fetches to splash colors. And it's going to play near that floor of a 5 in the blue-red, like lower value energy deck, or blue-green decks. But even in the blue-green deck, so like, you'll find a lot, I haven't talked about it much because we haven't gotten through all the colors, but a lot of the cards tend to have higher value ratings the more color pair archetypes they play well in. And a lot of the commons tend to play really well in 2 of the archetypes, and the uncommons tend to play really well in 3 of the archetypes, sometimes 3.5. But a card that plays well in all 4 archetypes ends up having a very high rating and is also quite rare. There's very, like, some card, like, just as an example, this card and this card have high ratings because I'm happy to play them in any archetype. Whereas, where are all my 3s? I guess I don't have a lot of them. Okay, blue does not have that many 3s and 4s. This card only plays well in a couple of the archetypes. But yeah, this is another good card with Deem Unworthy. It's just a card you're always gonna be not upset to have. It doesn't even have diminishing returns. So a lot of the energy cards have diminishing returns. Like, we look at our blue-white Emissary Soulfire. This card is awesome, very cool. If you have you probably might not even play the 3rd copy. Like, unless you are really hurting for energy sources, you want diverse ways to spend your energy. But if you have 3 Royal Cartographers in play and play a land to gain 3 energy, that's the same as drawing a card and a half. Yeah, just very powerful energy card. It does have diminishing returns outside of the energy deck. All right, up next, Sage of the Unknowable. This is a 2-mana 0/4 great blocker. You don't want a great blocker unless you can also spend this mana. So this is very good in the Eldrazi deck, and okay in some of the other decks, but it's really good in the Eldrazi deck. And if you're not the Eldrazi deck and you just have a lot of cards like, you know, the Corrupted Shapeshifter or the Depth Defiler, then you're not too upset about having it because it does block, but it is an inherently defensive card. You don't want this if you're not a defensive deck, which is why it's a 4. It's pretty good ramp if you are. You'll find that a lot of, like, the ramp for the blue-green Eldrazi deck is very good because none of it is only ramp. This is ramp that also blocks really well. There's a ramp creature that is the Death Touch creature. There's a ramp creature that draws a card. There are growth spiral effects that you get to look at the top 4, and things that make Scions all do more than just draw a card. The cards that are only ramp are generally pretty bad. That's the problem with Worn Power Stone in this set. Like, Worn Power Stone is 3 mana to make 2 mana. That should be pretty good, but it's competing against ramp that blocks or ramp that digs for cards. Up next, Serum Visionary. If you, like, 3 mana 2/2 draw a card is so insanely busted in every other set. The fact that this one, that this is just okay is a little sad. But it doesn't do enough things. Like, your blue decks care about drawing 3 cards in a turn. This does not help you draw 3 cards in a turn. I'm not gonna be, like, I'll play most of the copies of this card that I get, but it competes with space in so many little ways. Like, if I have a playset of Sage of the Unknowables, I'm going to want to skip my 3-drops a lot of the time. I just want 4 mana Eldrazi creatures. Oh my god, Ranger. That would not be insane. Like, the power level of this just illustrates how high the power level of this set is. So this is not a card advantage card because the 2/2 body is not good enough. It doesn't trade with enough things. Like, your opponent, even your opponent's aggressive deck is likely going to be able to get their creatures to 3 toughness, which turns this into just a chump blocker. And in other sets, you will have time to play out 2 copies of this card and block your opponent's 3/3 with 2 2/2s. You're not going to have that time this set. It's still playable. Like, I gave it a 4. And you're still going to play with it when you have it, but you're not going to pick it crazy high. It is really good when you need to dig for specific things. So if you have a really engine-oriented deck, well, when you're digging for bombs, the Serum Visionary is solid. It digs you 3 cards deep and it replaces itself and it blocks. But, like, if you're digging for an engine, then it's replacing cards that participate in that engine. Like, Royal Cartographer both digs for an engine and participates in your engine. Serum Visionary only digs for your engine. And this is something, so Drewby, I'm going to be arguing with Scott about this card, I'm sure. Because Scott is refusing to look at the cards ahead of the time. But he's going to be like, what do you mean Serum Visionary is bad? Yes, I'm fully prepared. Arguing with Scott makes me a better Magic player, so I'm looking forward to it. But no, it can't draw a card first of all, but because it's Serum Visions. The card's really cool. Like, it's a great reference. So for those of you who weren't playing Magic in 2004, Serum Visions is the card that we're referencing. Draw a card, scry 2, extra eyes. So the Serum Visionary has the same eyes and is a 2/2 that Serum Visions. Organ Hoarder, we're gonna hang out for 90 seconds because there's an ad going. But yeah, Organ Hoarder might not be playable in this set. I don't think Organ Hoarder is good enough. Like, Organ Hoarder was good in Innistrad because putting 2 cards in your graveyard. Oh, while we're here, just Organ Hoarder. So Organ Hoarder was the best card in Shadows over Innistrad, and it was correct to take this. Innistrad Midnight Hunt. And it was correct to take Organ Hoarder over most rares, and it was correct to splash Organ Hoarder. But just to illustrate what this set is like, this card would not play well in this set because this card was always it always got you the best of 3 cards and then traded up with a 3/3, or with a 4/3. This set, the stat lines just don't line up with it. Like, the cards that you have to deal with are so powerful. So yes, play Serum Visionaries when you have them. Don't spend picks on Serum Visionary when you don't need to. That's where we're at. All right, up next. Oh, we're gonna wait 20 seconds because we're in an ad. And I need water. I love this old art. This is a Mirage or a Visions card. Shrieking Drake. Really cool card. Thank you, Alva. I will hydrate again. Yeah, Wing Spear. I'm sorry, I know you had an ad. Organ Hoarder would not be playable in this set as by itself. So Shrieking Drake. What a cool card. It was cool in Visions. There were a lot, like, it can target itself. So that floor of a 3, you can't play Shrieking Drake unintentionally. You have to think hard about how you're playing Shrieking Drake. But there are really good ways to use Shrieking Drake. So Shrieking Drake, as a 1-mana 1/1, can return itself. So what this does is pick up cards that you want to pick up. So, like, you can pick up a Petrifying Meddler to effectively untap it, stun something, and make 2 Scions. You can pick up a Serum Visionary to scry 2 and draw a card again. You can pick up Hope Ender Coatl to enter Coatl. Is it Coatl or Coatl? To end your opponent's Hope. There's a lot of good targets for Shrieking Drake. However, it also has a hidden mode of pay X mana, cast X creature spells, which is awesome because there are a ton of cards in this set that say whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, do a thing. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, make an energy and gain a life. Now you get to gain X energy, make X life. Shrieking Drake is a combo card, and there are really, really cool combos that you can do it. It is mandatory. You have to pick up a card, which means you can never play Shrieking Drake to an empty board, which means Shrieking Drake will never be a 1-mana 1/1 flyer. Which, as a fail case, a 1-mana 1/1 flyer is pretty good. You have to return a creature, including itself. But, like, your fail case of a 1-mana 1/1 flyer that untaps a creature by recasting it, that's pretty weak. But as we saw yesterday, there are some crazy enter the battlefield effects. There are some really good creatures that you can pick up. Maybe Depth Defiler. So, like, Depth Defiler and Shrieking Drake is a weak but fun engine. You can pay 6 mana to draw 2 cards, bounce your own Shrieking Drake or your opponent's creature, then Shrieking Drake up the Depth Defiler, and they'll cycle back and forth. Shrieking Drake is going to be a 3 or a 4 when you are resetting a creature. When you're resetting another creature's enter the battlefield ability, or maybe freeing it from a Dog Umbra or a different aura. There are rares, a fair number of rares, I don't know all of them because I haven't looked at all the rares yet, that this combos with, that lets you just build an engine. There are, like, whenever you have to consciously pair this with other cards, and you need to make sure there's no risk of you drawing this when you can't play it or when you can't gain value from it. But if you can do that, you can get it up to that ceiling of 7 and it'll be pretty cool. So Wing Spear, there are cards that say, there's at least one rare that says whenever a creature comes into play, gain an energy and gain a life. You can pay X mana into the Shrieking Drake to gain X energy. Here, you know what? Let's do it. Let's check. Oracle. Whenever. I checked this earlier, but alright, what have we got? Whenever creatures attack, here, Distinguished Conjurer, you get to gain X life. Not a land. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, gain 1 life and get an energy. So gain X life, make X energy. Whenever another non-token creature you control enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So you get to, yeah, oh my god. Being able to proliferate X times, so much fun. But like, it's not awful if you're just resetting, like a Marionette Apprentice, fabricating when you play it. Yeah, there's also like, there's a lot of good, interesting combos. I'm pretty excited to, oh, Molten Gatekeeper. X blue, deal X damage. Oh, I didn't realize it was a Magecraft creature. Like, even if you're just resetting your cards for Monstrous Vortex, it's not terrible. Ooh, Genku Future Shape. That's not a card I've read yet. So if you pay 4 into your Drake, you get to trigger all of these every turn. But like, often enough, you're just going to be resetting your adventure or resetting some energy. There's a lot of cool things you can do. There are not as many as I thought, but there are not as many as I thought at Rare. But yes, I like Shrieking Drake. It's going to be fun to play with. And a 1-mana 1/1 flyer is not a dead body, but it is a combo card. Now, I'm happy with this ceiling of a 7 and this floor of a 3. Like, 4 is not a good rating. You shouldn't take this high. You want to already have the cards it combos with when you take the Shrieking Drake. But you can get the cards it combos with. All right, up next, we have a very good MDFC. So, Sink into Stupor, Soporific Springs. It's really likely that that both of these modes are going to be useful for you. Like, a lot of the blue decks are going to want 18 lands anyway. Or 17 lands with 2 MDFCs, or 16 lands with 3 or 4 MDFCs. And this is a good one. This is a nice catch-all. Bouncing a spell or a permanent is really useful. And being on the, like, if this were any MDFC that you will play is something I will give a 4 or a 5. Blue gets a little bit more out of the MDFCs. And I'm happy to play with this card in every blue deck. I'll play 3 to 4 copies of this card in every blue deck. But if you are playing 3 to 4 copies of this card in your blue deck, you need card draw to go with it. So it kind of has diminishing returns, but you can add more copies the more card draw you have. Because it is card advantage negative. Yeah, the MDFCs are really good. Like, they were designed for Constructed. They're great in this format. Tamio meets the Story Circle. What a cool card. Okay, so it's good to break this one down a little bit. Chapter 1, you get to shrink your opponent's team. Chapter 2, discarding a number of cards, investigate twice per discarded card. So this is discard a card, draw 2, but you have to put 4 mana in. And then Chapter 3, shuffle 3 cards from your graveyard into your library. So like, this is nice in the control decks, because the control decks draw so many cards, there is a risk of them, there's a risk of them running out of cards, and it's nice for putting things into your graveyard when you need to. It's also nice because you get to bank the card draw so that you can trigger your draw too. But there is a very cool hidden mode on this card. Does anyone want to guess what it is before I tell you? So, Tamio meets the Story Circle is an enchantment for 2 mana that says, on turn 3, put 15 artifacts into play. There are a lot of cards that really want you to put 15 Thank you, exactly, Ranger. You can put 15 artifacts into play on turn 3. You probably won't. You'll probably put 4 to 6 artifacts into play on turn 3. Like, discarding 3 cards to make 6 clues lets you play all of your affinity cards. Or play all the cards that care about artifacts leaving play or coming into play. I'm really excited to do that. So I will splash this in an affinity deck. It kind of like is a weird card, right? Because all of these modes, like, you can be card positive. If this is 2 mana, discard a card and investigate twice. That's a little weak, but decks need these modes. These are useful modes. When you're drawing a ton of cards, being able to shrink your opponent's board is pretty useful. When you are banking the card draw is really useful, because like if I play this on turn 2 and discard one card to investigate twice, that's a little bit worse than discarding a card to draw a card, unless I have the Emrakul's Messenger into play. Now I get to trigger this 2 times instead of just once with my clues. So it's not an easy card to play with, it's not an easy card to build around, but the decks that are drawing 3 cards a turn, because there's a blue-black card whenever this creature attacks, draw cards equal to its power, then discard that many cards, you're gonna mill out. You can, one of the downsides to, so like in Magic, you have a 40 card deck, you start with a 7 card hand. On turn 10, you are down 17 cards, so you have 23 cards left, which means that you can only ever trigger this drawing your 3rd card a turn effect, 5, 6, 7 times in a game. So having 2 copies of Tamiyomi's The Story Circle, or 1 copy of Tamiyomi's The Story Circle and the ability to return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand, which you can find in green and black, then you can't deck. You cannot mill yourself out. And that's incredibly valuable when you are only have a 40 card deck and are drawing, like, you're not netting that many cards, but if you get a bestow card onto your 2/3, you're drawing 4 a turn, discarding a 4 a turn. Yes, exactly, Wing Spear. So like you can turn 2 Cranium Ram, turn 3 Tamiyomi's The Story Circle, turn 4 discard 4 cards, attack for 10. All right, it's a cool card, good design, not something you want to pick crazy high, but if you are a blue-black control deck, you're going to need a copy of this. So you don't actually need 2 copies to keep from decking, but if you're drawing your whole deck, you can put your 3 best cards back into your library and then you don't have to worry about it. And 2 copies of this keeps you from decking. All right, up next we have Tempest Harvester. Wait, does 2 copies keep you from decking? Discarding number of cards. So it's 3 chapters. So that means that it doesn't keep you from decking with 2 copies, because you don't get to actually shuffle the other cards back until 2 turns after you play it, which means that if you have 2 copies of this card, I'm just thinking this through now. If you have 2 copies of this card, then that means you have a 1 in 3 chance of decking every loop. That's hilarious. All right. Tempest Harvester. It's solid. It's a good energy card. It's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 5. A 2-mana 2/1. So tapping to loot for free is powerful and limited. It lets you run extra lands. It lets you put cards in your graveyard, and cards care about drawing your 2nd card in a turn. If you can only do this twice and then start attacking with your 2/1, you'll manage. You want this to be a... You want to be looting more with it, but it's not hard to build a deck that loots more with it. You don't have to be a dedicated energy deck for Tempest Harvester to be good. You just need a few other ways to produce energy, because you can dig for them. And being a 2/1 is not an unreasonable attacker. It's solid. Like, this is a gluey common that you will put in a lot of your decks, and is great in energy and is great in the card draw deck. So blue-black and blue-white really want this card. Blue-red can use this card reasonably well. Blue-green doesn't really care about the Tempest Harvester. Yeah, so I gave it a 5, and it's usually going to play near that ceiling. Just don't bother with it in the Eldrazi deck. Triton Wavebreaker. This one's a little bit awkward because this is an incredible aggressive card and a color that doesn't want to be that aggressive, but there's enough flyers that like you're not upset when you put this on it. It's usually going to play near that floor of a 4, which is you just like... In an aggressive deck, a 1-mana 1/1 prowess is solid. In every other deck, it's just going to be bestowed onto a flyer. So it's usually going to play near that floor. There's not... Like, you can be a blue-black aggressive tempo deck, or a blue-red actually aggressive deck with prowess, and then the card goes up to that ceiling of a 6, but it's usually going to play near that floor of a 4. Tune the Narrative. Always solid. Like, always pretty... It's a 6 in an energy deck. It's a 4 in all of the other decks, and it's usually going to play as a 5 when you're just drawing a card. But like, it triggers your prowess. It replaces itself. It makes 2 energy. You might be able to turn that 2 energy into a whole card on its own. Just math-wise, this is 1-mana draw card, so it always replaces itself. But if you have Royal Cartographer in your deck anywhere, then it's 1-mana draw a card, draw another card later. So 1-mana draw 2, very good. If you have... What we just looked at it. Why can't I find you? the Tempest Harvester, then this is 1 mana, draw a card, loot, draw 3 cards, discard 2 cards. Like, there are good ways to use this card past just being a cantrip, and this is a set where a 1 mana cantrip is something you really want, and there's not that many. There are very few. I think this is the only 1 mana draw a card. There's one in black that you have to sacrifice a creature, and if it's modified, draw a card. But this is a good card in this set. Draw a card, get 2 energy is great. Attune with Aether was basically the same thing. That was a green card. Search for a basic land, draw a card, and gain 2 energy. That card was first pickable in draft and banned in modern, or banned in standard. In this set, the general power level is still high, but this is still a good card. It's great for energy, but it's good elsewhere. Like, even the non-energy decks want a little bit of extra incidental energy, and Tune the Narrative is great for that. Twisted Riddle Keeper. This is a true Eldrazi card. So 8 mana for 5/5 that stuns 2 things, that's bad. But Emerge is pretty great. So Emerge is a returning mechanic. Emerge in the past was really good, but that was because there were creatures you really wanted to emerge from. You really wanted to eat your Death Cultist that drew a card for 3 mana. This set doesn't have those for free. It does have those. Like, if you the floor is a 3, that's if you're casting it. The ceiling is a 7, that's if you can reliably emerge it. So it's usually going to be somewhere between them. And maybe you have a Reform deck. Like, if you turn 4 Reform, turn 5 make a 3/3, and tap 2 of your opponent's creatures, it only costs you 3 mana, blue wastes 1. Oh no, it doesn't even cost you blue and waste. It only costs you 3 colorless mana to emerge from a Reform. So it can tap their lands. I actually missed that, Theo. So you don't want to tap their lands on turn 8, but tapping their lands on turn 5 is going to be like a Time Walk on your 5/5 flyer. So this is harder to use. Like, this is a build around card. So the fail case of you not finding something to sack with it is paying the full 8 mana. That's not bad. But it's not a terrible fail case. So, like, you need to build to the Riddle Keeper, and you need to draft to the Riddle Keeper, and then it's going to do some work for you. Thank you, Theo. I actually missed that I could tap their lands. I don't think that it changes the rating, because the rating was not based on the effect, but on the cost, and the cost is too high without creatures to emerge from. Even if you're emerging from a token, it's still cheaper to emerge from a token. If you emerge from a token, it's still only 7 mana, even though it doesn't reduce the cost at all. Yeah, you need the creatures that want to die to play this, but there are enough creatures that want to die that you can play this. And this is just another example of the problem with Dog Umbra. The Dog Umbra is bad. All right, up next, Unfathomable Truths. 5 mana, draw 3. There are better ways to draw 3 cards, but you will have to play this a reasonable amount of the time. Being instant speed is nice, but there's not other 5 mana instants that you want. The Eldrazi spawn is almost worth a card. So one of the problems generally with 5 mana draw 3 is 5 mana draw 3s tend to be really good in formats where you have the time to draw 3, and really bad when you don't. Being instant speed does make this one a lot better, but the Eldrazi spawn's relevant. Like, you get to draw 3 cards and then gain an extra mana. More often you'll probably draw 3 cards and chump block your opponent's 5, but like 5 mana draw 3 cards, gain 5 life is really good. It's better when you can cast it. And it's better the more cheap spells you have. Like, if I have 3 copies of Demon Worthy, where are you? If I have a bunch of Demon Fury, if I have a bunch of Demon Furiers, then I'll be much happier to play this card. But yeah, it's solid. It just has diminishing returns, as all the card draw does. All right, and then finally, Utter Insignificance. This is blue's only pure actual removal spell. Often it's just going to be a combat trick, but this line of text, like, you need to include ways to trigger this. If this card is only turn it into a 1/1 and loses all abilities, that's bad. That's not good enough removal. Well, it's fine removal. I gave it a 4 still. If you have reliable ways to exile the enchanted creature, then you can play it at the ceiling of a 6. You can also, it's not easy, but there are ways to blink this. So, like, you can put the trigger on the stack and move it, or blink it to something else. And they're at rare, so I didn't include it in the evaluation, but I do want to point it out. But like, if you have where's all the bounce spell? there are just not that many bounce spells in this set. Like bounce is not the best example, but if you have like a reasonable enough bounce spell, you can bounce this and you can exile it, and then with the trigger on the stack, bounce it and then play it on something else. But it's only 2 mana, and the blue deck really struggles to deal with things pre-engine. So like Demon Fury is a great removal spell for blue, but not on turn 2. Not until you have your card draw set up or your creatures in play. But Utter Insignificance it's not the end of the world if you play it on your opponent's 3-drop and then get going. So I think it's pretty good. You need blockers. So this goes back to where how am I blocking? Blue-black needs ways to block, because you need to buy time and you need to block the 1/1s. Like, your opponent gets to keep the 1/1, and the 1/1 body, there's lots of ways to grow it. You have to be able to exile it eventually for this card to be worth playing, but the control decks are good at that. Oh, I'm so glad. We were just, did you get to play Tamiyomi's Story Circle? We were just talking about this for Affinity, because this lets you put like 8 artifacts into play on turn 3. I'm glad it worked out, Chronophage. All right, it is time for red, and I will be right back. I'm gonna get some more water. Yeah, I think Affinity is one of the best decks if your opponent doesn't have the hate for it, and if you're the only, like, you can't compete for Affinity, but if you're not competing for it, it's amazing. All right, I'll be right back. I'm just getting some water, and we'll keep going. I'm back. All right, on to ooh, the Dragon with Affinity. We'll talk about the Dragon with Affinity shortly. Okay. Red. I need to figure out the titles so they don't get... I guess it's too late, huh? I have the slides here. All right, so blue-red energy. It's energy engines. We talked about this before, but we're gonna do it again because some people are gonna skip straight to red. All right, so Wizards builds this as pure energy engines. That's not the case. It is engines, but they don't have to be energy. You can do it with prowess and be more aggressive and build an engine that pumps out, that produces damage. Thanks, Ruby. Or you can do an engine that there's some we'll talk about. But there are some really interesting engines in general. When you are drafting blue-red, you need cheap removal first. Oh, I should say, red has the best removal in the format. All of the best removal spells in the format are red spells. And it also has the most flexible instants and sorceries, but it has the least flexible everything else. It has the least flexible artifacts, the least flexible creatures, which means that early, if you want to draft red, maybe you open a big red rare in pack 1, just something strong like a dragon. You don't draft, and then you have a choice between a removal spell and a creature. You take the removal first, because you can commit to a color in this format without committing to an archetype, and is often correct to. But you prioritize your removal. Take your removal spells first, because they're all going to be more flexible than the creatures and then the artifacts. So, when you're doing a blue-red engines deck, cheap removal first, then your flexible creatures, the ones that go into multiple archetypes, then your specific creatures. So like if I am, even within blue-red, if I don't know whether I'm going to be a prowess deck or an energy deck, then I need to take the flexible creatures first and then decide on the specific ones, because there's always a chance I won't get to play these specific creatures. And then finally there's card advantage. You take that last, and that's not because you don't need it, you do, but it's plentiful. You can find more card advantage, and your card advantage might just come from straight card draw, but it might come from setting up a nice engine. By the way, when I do these are not the only 4 things you need. These are just the 4 most important things you need in order. So Cyclops Superconductor is a really good bridge card between being an energy deck and just a prowess deck, because it's a 3-mana 2/2 with prowess, gains 3 energy, spends 3 energy. It spends the same amount that it gains. You get to use this ability even if you have no other energy cards in the deck. And you might, like, if you can trigger prowess 3 times on your superconductor when it dies, that's a lot better than just letting it die and deal 2 damage to something. You also kind of want to lean blue or red in these decks, and that's because if you have a situation where you're drawing a ton of cards, it's a good idea to figure out whether you're going to have 3 Demon Inferiors or 3 red burn spells, because just for the sake of your mana. Like, the choke point is going to be on colored mana symbols in blue-red. So leaning one way or the other is going to be better for your deck. Rather than have 9 mountains, 8 islands, you would rather have a deck with 10 mountains, 7 islands, or vice versa. You want to figure out how fast, like, are you playing at instant speed or sorcery speed? A lot of the sorcery speed cards are on your own turn, you trigger prowess 3 times and attack. That means that having counter spells is bad. Or maybe you're playing on your opponent's turn, which means you want more instant speed, burn, and counter spells. And like equally powerful cards, you want to know whether you're playing them on your turn or your opponent's turn as you draft and as you build your deck. And then know whether you're going to be prowess or energy. There are other options, but they require rares or piles of specific uncommons. At common and uncommon, you're usually going to be either a red-blue prowess deck or a red-blue energy deck. All right. The red-white. So, Boros, energy aggro. Your pick order is going to generally go removal, bodies, efficient ones. Cards that generate energy, they can be less efficient once you have the efficient bodies. Conduit Goblin is particularly good because it's both. And then anthems, ways to grow your whole team. You do need some ways to grow your whole team, inspired charges or anthems, but there are enough of them that you can pick them late, and you can't fit more than 3 or 4 total, and that's only because some of them are creatures. If your way to pump your whole team is not a creature, then you can only have like 1 or 2 of those. Prioritize your removal so that it clears out blockers. That means prioritizing the red removal. The white removal is very bad at clearing blockers. And then decide whether you're going to close the game out with burn spells or by just going wide with a large number of creatures. You can also do it with evasion. Burn or go wide or evasion. And these aren't mutually exclusive, but it will help you a lot to lean into one. All right, red-green Eldrazi Scions. So, this is the archetype, the color pair in this set with the best creatures. They just have the best creatures. All of their creatures are better than all of the other creatures at the same point on the curve. Writhing Chrysalis is a 4-mana 4/5 that also has 2 other bodies that has reach. Their creatures are bigger, their creatures do more. This might be the best archetype. I'm not positive yet, but red-green Eldrazi might be the best archetype. Pick order. You need removal first. I know that's going to be a common thing, but red removal is really good, and it's cheap. Your cheap spells are removal in this. Then your good creatures, things like Writhing Chrysalis or your 5/5s, and then the way your finishers, the way to end the game. You'll find a lot of board states walking around your pre-release where your opponent, actually, we have a few people who just came back in the pre-release. How often did you walk around and see your opponent with a 2020 Writhing Chrysalis or 2 2020 Writhing Chrysalis that were just being chump blocked by Scions every turn? There are a lot of huge creatures with no evasion or no way to close the game, and there are not a ton of ways to grant trample to your board or to give them evasion. But there are a few, and we're going to look at. And then other creatures, your filler creatures, your ones that block or maybe just produce a Scion. You need them, but you want them after you get your good creatures. And if you're not seeing the good creatures, then you may have to do something else. You also need colorless lands in this, so you're going to have to take them a little more aggressively. You keep track of the wastes you need. So like, you need to find a way to use your Scions, and all of the ways in this format that use Scions require wastes to use. And if you have enough Scions, you don't need the wastes, but it's hard to have enough Scions and not need your wastes. And then finally, red-black affinity. Removal first, then, well, so this is a little bit more interchangeable than the others, but removal, payoffs, artifacts, and then reliance. So you want your payoffs for having artifacts. Cranial Ram is nice because it's all of them. Then you want raw artifacts. These are artifacts that affect the board or replace themselves, things that come into play and stay in play. And then the cards that are reliant on artifacts. So we'll look at a few of them, but like a lot of affinity cards are just unplayable if you don't have the artifacts to go with them. So you take them last. There's all you can be a black-red control deck. It doesn't have to be red-black affinity if you have enough removal, but those removal spells lets you pivot. And the problem with affinity generally is if you start out in affinity, if I pack one, pick one, this Cranial Ram, and then someone else pack one, pick one's a Cranial Ram at the table, there will not be enough artifacts to support both of us playing. That's why you have to take your removal before your artifacts. Like, you might notice that removal is at the top of a lot of these, is because that is the only flexible point that red has. Red is the only place where red is flexible is in the removal. So when you are red, you need to take the removal. All of the other red cards, other than removal spells, only go in one deck. And in order to maintain that flexibility, you need to get into red either with a very powerful rare that you can force in multiple archetypes, or with the removal spells. So yes, Cranial Ram was banned in Pauper preemptively because there are artifact lands legal in Pauper, which means that you can play a 3/1 on turn 2 that is a 5, 6, 7, 8/1 on turn 3, and then continue to equip it to your Ornithopters and your Vault Scourges and your Frogmites. It should have been pre-banned in Pauper. It shouldn't have been a common because of that. Like, they knew it would be pre-banned in Pauper, so they should have made it an uncommon, and they could have pretty... Yeah. So the card this is based on, Wingspear, is called Cranial Plating, which is, I don't believe it's currently banned in Pauper, but a lot of people think it should be. Plus 1/+0 for each artifact you control, and like, Pauper Affinity is very powerful. You get to run Ornithopters, you get to run Frogmites, and now you get even more affinity cards. And there's other affinity cards banned in Pauper also. All right, first red card. This card is silly. So it has Pseudo Cascade. So this is a 2-mana 2/1 first strike. That is good. This is a format where first strike is very rare. There's very few cards with it. Thank you, Ranger. I wasn't sure. I know it was a big debate for a long time over whether it should be, because cranial plating is a common for some reason. Yeah, and Raptor, 2-mana 2/1 first strike is good in this format. There are two ways to take advantage of the rest of the text on this. So is a floor of 4 because it's a 2-mana 2/1 first strike, with a chance of playing another spell. So it's a lot of text, but it basically says you reveal until you just reveal cards. You reveal the top card of your library, and you keep going until it's not a land, and then you can pay energy to cast that spell instead of mana. So if you reveal a 2-drop, then you just get a second 2-drop on turn 2. But if you're an energy deck and you have 5 energy and you reveal a 5-drop, you can cast that too. It's not the end of the world if you play this and miss. Like if you play this 2-mana 2/1 first strike and you don't hit a 3-mana and 2-mana creature, or a creature with less mana value than you have energy, it's still a reasonable body on turn 2, and that generated you 2 energy. It's still a 2-mana 2/1 first strike that made 2 energy for you. In the energy deck, this is a 2-mana 2/1 that just casts the next spell in your library for free. Card is really good in the energy deck, and it's reasonable everywhere else. You don't have to be an energy deck, but like it makes all of these random cards like Tune the Narrative, makes Raptor cast a 4-mana spell. You can also build your deck to make it so that you can you're more likely to hit. Even if you're not an energy deck, if you have mostly 2-drops, then this is usually going to hit something you can cast. Very strong 2-drop. I forgot a blue card, which we'll talk about after we finish red. And I remember it because Barbarian Ring. So this is not technically a red card, it is a colorless card. But you need to be very heavy red for this card to do what you want it to do. The Threshold is it's supposed to trigger late into the game. Activate only if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. Because there's not a lot of ways to exile cards in this format, you're likely going to have Threshold at some point in the game. But the decks that want Barbarian Ring are the same decks that are going to have a lot of trouble getting to 7 cards in the graveyard. And adding a red to deal 1 damage to yourself is not free. Like, if this deals 5 damage to you over the course of the game, that's a bad land. The only way that Barbarian Ring is going to be good for you is if you can get it to fire somewhere before it deals too much damage to you. But yeah, I gave it a 3. It's a pretty low score. It's usually going to play at a 2. But like the aggressive burn decks will play it. The decks with a lot of card draw will play it. And the decks that want a lot of lands will play it. But they're never going to be that happy about it. This is a really interesting card to have in Modern though. Like burn decks might get to play this. Cool card, not very strong. And the card I forgot to review in blue was Cephalid Coliseum. And I just realized that. We'll go back at the end. Fanged Flames, 2-mana deal 4. It kills 83% of creatures in this set, and it is the one card that exiles it on kill. It's also nice because it hits the pro red card. So we talked about a card yesterday called Breaker of Creation. It kind of sucks how many devoid spells kill this card. It would be better if there weren't 2 different 4-mana deal 4 colorless spells. But 2-mana deal 4 is just good. It's a good spell. It's a good removal spell. You can take it pretty high. The floor should not be a 3. That's just a typo. I meant it should be a 4. It's a 4 if you don't care about color spells or if you don't care about prowess. You kind of always do. Yeah, sorry, we jumped the floor up 2. And we're gonna drop this effort to a low. This is the other deal 4 color spell. It doesn't hit players, but like it kills enough stuff that you're happy to play it. And it is bad against the Eldrazi deck, and that's it. Yeah, it does. I mean, it's 2-mana destroy a creature though, pretty good. All right, Fledgling Dragon. So 4-mana 2/2 flying, bad. 4-mana 5/5 fly with fire breathing, good. This is work. You will have to put the work in to make it a 5/5 flyer. If you do that, it's fine. There are a few good ways to loot. There are a few good ways to mill yourself. I think there's a blue-red artifact deck that runs that Tameo card. You discard your hand, you play the Fledgling Dragon. But you really have to find a way to get to threshold, and that's not free. In other formats, a 4-mana 2/2 flyer was good enough on its own, but like if you're not milling yourself or looting a lot of cards, you're not going to turn this on often enough. Without threshold, this card's bad. With threshold, it's great, but I gave it a 3 because you can get there. There are enough red-based mid-range decks that you can get there. Frogmer Enforcer. Great in the affinity deck. So if we look at the cost breakdown of this, like a 4-mana 2/2 or a 7-mana 4/4 is pretty weak. This really has to be 1 mana to be worth prototyping as a 2/2, and it really has to be 4 mana to be worth prototyping, to be worth casting as a 4/4. Like, you're not gaining anything if you're not paying 3 mana for it or 1 mana for it, which means you need to have at least 3 artifacts in play reliably for this card to be good. That's not impossible, but it's not free either. It is a massive deck building requirement. So you only want this in Affinity or in a deck that's good at making a lot of artifacts, and that's not every deck. But like, there are 2 versions of this card available in Pauper also. This is cool because it is Mirror Enforcer, which is 7 mana 4/4 affinity for artifacts, and Frogmite, a 4 mana 2/2 affinity for artifacts. Really cool design on this one. I'm going to drop the floor to a 3 because you really only wanted it in the affinity decks, and you really wanted it in the affinity decks. So, like, this is a very strong signal. If you table this and if that means affinity is open, play it. It's going to be awesome for you. Otherwise, don't bother. Here's another really cool affinity card. It's even better than the other one. Like, this one is not as terrible if you cast it for 7 mana. It's still not good, but like, you don't have to be an affinity deck to have 2 artifacts in play in this format. You can play this in a non-dedicated affinity deck. You can play this in like a modified deck, or if you just have a few equipment, or if you just have a few living weapons. Then you can pay 5 mana for this and not be upset. Being an artifact is a little bit of a liability because it can be shattered, but like, you can get this. You're more likely to get 2 or 3 artifacts out to play this on turn 4 or turn 5, and be happy with it, than you are to have 3 artifacts in play. Because like, you can play this, the Frogmer Enforcer, as a 1 mana 2/2 on turn 4, after having 3 artifacts in play, but you're not gaining as much as you are by playing this as a 5 mana 5/5 on turn 4 or turn 5. So it's a lot better as an affinity card. It's a lot less risky because you don't have to be a dedicated affinity deck to play this card. Yes, and so Wingspear, you'll find, so one of the reasons that I always do this, stats. There are 17 creatures with flying, and 6 creatures with reach. The lower these numbers are, the higher this number is, the better this number is. The lower this number is, the worse this number is. The lower this number is, the better every card that has it is. So in this set, there are not that many flyers. That means that flyers are very good. You also need ways to close the game, and this is like, the archetypes tend to lean towards having 1 creature at the top end that has the ability. So in this case, Affinity has artifacts at the top, and Furnace Hellkite is a really good way to do it. Hi Rosalie, good to see ya. So Hellkite is a really good way to close the game for an artifact deck, but even if you're just a regular red deck and you've got a few artifacts floating around that were, drew you a card when they came into play, or were tokens that you made, you're pretty happy with this one. All right, one sec, my dog is scratching at the door. You're being so annoying. Yeah, I'm almost done. All right, this is the best common in the set. I looked at all the commons. There are a lot of really good commons. I thought about it a lot. I came back and revised the score twice. This is the best one. Just as a quick breakdown, you have a lot of control over how much damage this card deals. If this card by itself is 1 mana, deal 3 damage. Deal 3 damage kills 67% of the cards in the set. If you have another copy of it, or make energy elsewhere, if you have 1 more energy, it kills 83%. If you have 2 more energy, it kills 90% of the creatures in the set. If you have 4 more energy, it kills every creature in the set for just 1 mana. This is a set where tempo is so important, and where double spelling is so important, and where the ability to pay 5 mana to draw 3 cards and then pay 1 mana to kill your opponent's creature will be the difference between a win or a loss. I will splash this card in a red-blue deck. I will splash this card in a blue-white deck. You will always want to play this card in any red deck. You will take it over just about any red non-rare card. You will take it over. You'll play the 6th copy. It gets better the more copies you have. You can't pump spell your way out of the Galvanic Discharge. So if I play a Galvanic Discharge, and you have 3 power, let's say, and you play a Giant Growth, give it +3/+3, I just don't have to spend the energy. Once you gain the energy and choose the amount of energy you spend as part of the resolution of the spell, which means your opponent doesn't get to know how much energy you're spending until after you spend it. That means, like, let's say your opponent has a Expanding Ooze. Your opponent has a 3-mana 3/3 Expanding Ooze and a black and a green up. You get to play this Galvanic Discharge, and then your opponent can adapt. And if they adapt, you don't have to spend any energy. Yes, this is the best common in this set. You need to be aware that this card exists while playing this format in all situations. It's great in the energy deck. It's great in the spells deck. It's great in the artifacts deck. It's not a strictly better bolt because it doesn't hit the face, but yes. It is strictly better than all bolt variants. It is strictly better than Strangle. It is strictly better than all of the cards that only hit creatures. The only reason bolt is better is because it can hit faces. That's it. And that, even then, this is not better than bolt in all situations, because if your opponent has a 4/4 and a 2/2, then your first Galvanic Charge can hit the 2/2 and you nets an energy, and your second Galvanic Charge spends 4 energy and hits the 4/4. Bolt can't do that. Yes, this card is really very strong. Hi, Fina. Good to see ya. Situationally. So let's talk about this. So if I am a non-red deck, I will splash Galvanic Discharge based on 3 factors. The first is the fetches that I have. So, like, let's say I first pick a card that I know I'm going to play. Let's say I am a blue-black deck. If I'm a blue-black deck and I have 2 Seething Landscapes, then I will take the Galvanic Discharge in Happy Pride. Then I'll take the Galvanic Discharge in Pack 2. Because I can fetch that 1 mountain pretty easily. If I can make treasures, I'll splash the Galvanic Discharge. If I am a green deck with some mana dorks, I will splash the Galvanic Discharge. If I'm not an energy deck and I have 2 copies of Solar Transformer, I'll splash the Galvanic Discharge. In terms of pick order, I will not pick up the means to splash Galvanic Discharge after a Galvanic Discharge. But the way the set is designed, I'm very likely to have the means to splash Galvanic Discharge before I see the Galvanic Discharge. Also, it means that I'm happy to first pick a Galvanic Discharge, because if I first pick Galvanic Discharge and then move into blue-black, then I know to keep an eye out for these Solar Transformers and these Grixis fetch lands, and then I will. But I'll always splash it in any green deck or in any energy deck. So most decks, I will splash Galvanic Discharge, but not every deck, which is why the ceiling is an 8. It's usually going to play at that ceiling, but I'll often just pick it at a 6 or a 7. And really, it's the fact that this kills, like, this has the potential to kill an Eldrazi. Usually it's just going to kill a relevant creature that has 5 toughness or 3 toughness, in addition to whatever you're doing on your turn normally. There are situations where I will take a Ghostfire Slice over Galvanic Discharge. These are similar in power. It has a slightly lower ceiling, but I'm less likely to splash the Ghostfire Slice, because Ghostfire Slice is also going to be better in a very aggressive deck. So, like, if I am an aggressive non-energy deck, I will take Ghostfire Slice over Galvanic Discharge. But in the energy deck, you'd rather have Galvanic Discharge. And in any energy deck, you'd rather have Galvanic Discharge. And if you're drawing a lot of cards, you'd rather have the Galvanic Discharge. But Ghostfire Slice, in a lot of decks, is 1 mana deal 4 to your opponent's face, and that's incredibly powerful in the aggressive decks. Yeah, that's Gold Slash. This is similarly, so Hexgold Slash was good for the same reasons. Hexgold Slash was good in that set because you could kill your opponent's 5-drop for 1 mana and then take your turn normally. Ghostfire Slice is similar. The ability to hit face is what makes this card strong. On average, the Galvanic Discharge is going to be better, but situationally, this card will be better for your specific deck. And is the same amount of splash. Red is the best removal in this set, and I don't think it's particularly close. But Ghostfire Slice is great. Not every deck will let you cast it for 3 mana, but the decks that you have to have this for 1 mana or you'll die will let you cast this for 1 mana. Like the red-white aggro decks. If you're up against a red-white aggro deck or a black-red affinity deck, these really aggressive, kill you right away kind of decks, then Ghostfire Slash is going to cost 1 mana because you really need it to. But the ability to take out your opponent's Cursed Wombat or Expanding Ooze in response to their adapt is so valuable. And so you don't have to target the multicolored card. If your opponent has a Conduit Goblin in play, then you can target their 4-drop with your Ghostfire Slice. So situationally, Ghostfire Slice is going to be better, but these are 2 of the best cards in the set. Just happens that one is a common. All right, up next we've got Glimpse the Impossible. So this card does not... be careful, because we've been spoiled lately. It says exile top 3 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. A lot of the cards we've been seeing with this text say until the end of next turn or until even the next end step. Is not unplayable. Whoops. Apparently I pressed a key that skips me to the... Oh, there's an end key on my keyboard. I've never seen that before. All right, Glimpse the Impossible. So you exile top 3 cards of your library. You can play them this turn at the beginning of the next end step. If any of those cards remain exiled, you put them into your graveyard and make a spawn for each card you put in your graveyard this way. On average, this is going to be on turn... you don't play this on turn 3. On turn 4, you can cast it and play a land. That's a thing, Wingspear. It's not default good on turn 3. It is good that it does help with Threshold. So this is a bad card that has a lot of niche uses. So it's usually going to be at that 3, and by default it's going to be at that 3. If you already have the cards that put it close to that ceiling, then you can play with this card. So like, this is cool. I like this card. It's not good, but I like it because it links a lot of these otherwise kind of weak cards into reasonable plays. So like, making 3 tokens, milling 3 cards is good in a lot of decks. If you have 7 drops that end the game like Kozilek and Emrakul, then this card is a lot better. But it's really tough to pull actual card advantage out of this. So like, the ideal situation most of the time is going to be 3 mana, play a land, make 2 Eldrazi spawns, that's fine. But it's usually just fine. If you're just trying to make tokens, there's better versions. If you're just trying to draw cards, there's better versions. But like, it's fine. And it has places. But those places need to be picked before the glimpse. Exactly. It's decent in some situations, Wingspear, and in some situations it's strong, but none of those situations are free. You will have to construct all of those situations with your picks and with your play and with your deck. Just changing the volume because I was getting a little bit of feedback. All right, Infernal Captor. So I revisited this one a few times. The red 4-drops are all kind of weak. They're all situational. So like, compared to a Fledgling Dragon, this card is a lot better. It's also a lot more likely that you will get to... This has good targets in this format. Like, your opponent might have a deck where their creatures sacrifice themselves. Your opponent might have Giant Eldrazi that you want to borrow for a turn. But it's not unreasonable to expect yourself to have some spawns lying around to exploit. And a 4-mana 3/3 that threatens an artifact or a creature is pretty good in this format. It's better than in a lot of formats. And your deck is really good at taking out the small creatures. So curving out into a 4-drop that borrows a creature is better than usual. And there's some really good things to grab. It's not free. It has diminishing returns. I'm actually going to go ahead and drop that floor to a 3. But this card is a lot better than the other content creators are telling you. And there are really powerful things you can do with it. In a red-black deck, this has 4 ways at common or uncommon to singularly sacrifice a creature, and another 3 ways to do it repeatedly. White also has ways to sacrifice your creatures. This card looks bad. It does. It's a 4-mana 3/3, but I promise you it will play better than it looks, and it will win games that you couldn't have won otherwise. In terms of the decks that it fits into, red black. I mean, I'll hurry haiku, but we're already like 6 hours into this thing. In the red black deck, this card is fantastic. This card is just actively good in red black. It's really easy to get ways to use it. There's also like a lot of weird incidental things that work out really well for you. Like even just taking your opponent's living weapon and then moving it off is pretty useful. There's a lot of creatures that self-sacrifice, and there's a lot of giant creatures. So this card is good in red black, full stop. In red white, full stop. Against all teamer decks, against all black red decks. Haiku, watch the first 10 minutes of yesterday's VOD. That's the best I can do for you. But yes, this card is much better than it looks. Much better than it reads, too. And I gave it a 3 and then went back and revised it after I read all the red and all the non-black cards, because I know it's good with black. All right, Inventor's Axe. Card's bad. It's fine in Affinity. It's fine when you have first strikers. It needs a lot of other things to go right to be good. Like, it's actively good with an Amped Raptor or with a cheap flyer, but it's pretty weak on its own and by default, and it's weak in the energy deck. The flash is not terribly relevant. It makes a creature trade up, not trade. Okay, yeah, that's pretty good flavor decks. Yeah, but it's just weak. It's good in the affinity deck only because the affinity deck just wants 1-mana artifacts, but even then it's kind of replaceable. Playable in a lot of places, but you're never happy to be playing it. Meltdown. This card's just cruel. Why would they put, like, I know this card needed to be reprinted into Modern. It's an important card for Modern, but like the red-black deck is already so fragile. You should take this card if you're not red and put it into your sideboard if you're playing best of 3, and then side it in because Affinity can't beat this card ever, and you don't want it against any deck that's not Affinity. But against Affinity, you win the game when you cast this. Silly. Yeah, against Affinity, you win the game when you cast this. It's only good against Affinity, and it's worth having in your sideboard because the Affinity deck is going to be tough to beat if your opponent gets a good one. But like, you splash this out of your sideboard, but it is a pure sideboard card. Yeah, so I'd say this is probably a 5 in best of 3. Like in best of 3, when you do your pre-release, take a look at your sealed pool and count your meltdowns and keep in mind where it is, because like you can put a mountain and 2 fetches in to get your red source for meltdown, and it wins the game against those decks. But otherwise, don't bother. It's not good enough in best of 1. It's very good in best of 3. Otherwise, ignore it. All right, Meteoric Mace. So you have very little control over this card. So this is 6 mana. Get a random spell out of your deck, and then 4 mana, all of the rest of your creatures turn into a threat this game. It's a little worse than Living Weapon just because you know the sizes. Like, this will occasionally win you the game. Try not to let that fool you into thinking it's a good card. However, Red and Eldrazi and a lot of these decks really struggle to close the game. So you're going to need one of these cards to close the game. This is not the one you want, but if you don't have the others, take it. Like Eldrazi, the Eldrazi deck wants a copy of target creature gains trample. There's other, like, so we'll look at it. So in green, there's Colossal Dreadmask. That card is what Eldrazi wants. Eldrazi wants Colossal Dreadmask. This is a card that you will play if you don't have the Dreadmask. If you don't have a way to give your team trample to close the game, play this. That ceiling goes up. That's that ceiling of a 7. If you're in pack 3 without a way to give your giant Eldrazi trample, you're going to need to run a copy of this card, and you're going to need to pick it as high as a 7. But you're not going to be happy about it. There are better things, and we will talk about them as we go. You really only need 1 or 2 ways to, like, creatures can't block this turn, or a creature has fly. uh trample, but like this is not the correct one. Yes, if you don't cast the Cascade spell, you don't keep it. And it's tough. So like Cascade is tough in the Eldrazi deck because yeah, you do run like cheaper spells. And if you hit a Galvanic Discharge, you're not upset. But you're so likely to hit like your 2-mana, like your Eldrazi deck, if you're cascading, is so likely to hit Sage of the Unknowable on turn 6. And you just don't want that to happen. It doesn't this doesn't mesh with stuff. Discover is the fixed version of Cascade. The difference, Wing Spear, is that Discover is ETB and Cascade is on cast, and cast triggers are a theme of this set. There are cards that work with this. There are cards that double your cast triggers. There are cards that do more when you cast more spells. There's a spell with Storm, but like all of those are rares. So I don't want to call this card unplayable because there are rares that make it work and there are situations where you need it. But you gotta value it like a 2 until pretty late. Like, it turns all of your Eldrazi spawns into 4/1s for the rest of the game, and that's useful, but there are better versions of cards that do it. Mogmob. This card is really cool, and this is amazing in a mono red deck. If you are a mono red deck with 3 copies of this card, you win the game. If you are a mostly red deck with some black cards to use as sack outlets, you win the game. It works really like there's going to be a strong mono red deck with a pile of Infernal Captors and a pile of Mogmobs and some emerge creatures, but like it is mono red is so difficult to have in this format. It's harder than colorless, like it's harder than waste. And even in mono red, like one of the reasons to be a monocolored deck or to have weird mana is to have these colorless lands, these wastelands, and you can't run them with the Mogmob. Like this is pretty binary. It's a 2 in most decks. It's a 6 if you're mono red, which means that pack one, pick one, or so like you still want to be aware of this card because like there are going to be situations where I open the pack and I take a Galvanic Discharge. So this is going to sound really specific, but I promise you it will happen. Let's say pack one, pick one. I have a Galvanic Discharge and a Mogmob in the pack. I'm going to take the Galvanic Discharge. I'm going to pass the pack. If pack 2 has a Ghostfire Blade and a Mogmob, I'm going to take the Ghostfire Blade and pass the pack. And then picks 8 and pick 9 and pick 10. I'm going to take the Mogmob and I'm going to have a busted mono red deck. So this is one of the most important cards. This and Cranial Ram are the most important cards to see in your pack 1 and not take. That's my Mogmob advice. I do love the card, but it is not a limited card because it's triple red. Molten Gatekeeper. This is a very good card. It works really well with that Shrieking Drake. Shrieking Drake Molten Gatekeeper is a pretty cool little combo. The Unearth is relevant. The fact that it's an artifact is relevant. So like the stat line is pretty average, but you'll find a lot that in the games, in the more aggressive red decks, closing out the game becomes an issue. Dealing the last 5 points is an issue. You can get 5 creatures into play. You can let this die and unearth it and get a few creatures into play. You can discard this to a loot effect and unearth it. This card will play better than it looks, and it looks pretty good. It's got being an artifact is relevant. Being a 2/3 is relevant, and the unearth is pretty good. Like, this will deal 8-ish points of damage over the course of a long game, and it's not a terrible top deck. That floor of a 3 is if you're just not a go wide creatures deck, but it's great in the go wide creatures deck, and it's strong elsewhere. Like this is a red white or black red card specifically, and it can be made to be blue red in the right deck. I wouldn't play it in green red. I gave it a 5. It's got a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 6. That ceiling of 6 is in the red-white go-wide aggro, where it's very good. Up next, we have Phyrexian Ironworks. This is an energy card. It is purely an energy card, but you don't need to make 1,000 energy to be good. So if this is 3 mana, attack 3 times, make a golem. That's really bad. But if you're just like a blue-red deck and you played this, tune the narrative. And then you played a 2-drop on turn 2. Turn 3, you can play the Ironworks, attack, get a 3rd energy, make a golem. If this makes a golem the turn it comes down, this card is good. If it doesn't, it's bad. You have to build your deck so that it makes the golem the turn you play this card. And if you don't play this card. But it's really good as an energy generator. That like your deck is as good as the best way to spend your energy. This is a good way to spend your energy. It's also a nice bridge card between affinity and the energy deck. So if I'm an affinity deck that makes energy incidentally, then I can use some of that energy to make some 3/3s. That looks good, Rosalie. Really good. I'm hungry now. All right, up next we've got Pinnacle Monk. This is a really very cool. So in the red aggressive decks, the ability to make them untapped is a lot more valuable. So like, I talked yesterday. We looked at what Stump, I believe it was called. Stump. So I said, you can take this in a mono red deck or a mono green deck. You can take this in a red white deck or a green black deck, and you'll be happy. The ability to come in untapped is a little bit more valuable. Tapped lands are a slightly larger cost. Tapped lands are a slightly larger cost in the aggressive decks than in the non-aggressive decks. Pinnacle Monk is nice. Like, you will play this as a land pretty happily, turns 1 through 4. On turn 5, you will play this to pick up a card. Specifically in red, you're a lot more likely to be able to pick up a card that you can then cast in the same turn. 5 mana for a 2/2 prowess is not fantastic, but picking up a spell and having it be a 3/3 once is nice. So I gave it a 6. The floor of a 5 is if you don't have a ton of instants and sorceries, but like there's a good prowess deck there. This is also a good card to like play as a land and then pick up later. And it combos with Shrieking Drake or other ways to blink your spells. There's a lot of places for this Pinnacle Monk in addition to it being a land. Hey King, how's it going? All right, up next we've got Ral and the Implicit Maze. This is great as a curve topper. So if you're a red aggressive deck, you're playing creatures every turn. Ral and the Implicit Maze clears out your opponent's blockers. If you're a more controlling deck, it might just kill one creature, but then you get to discard a card to draw to and make a Spellgorger weird. Taken together, this is a lot of value that you can gain over time. It is hard to make every piece work, but you're going to be really happy to top your curve with this in most decks, or to just use it as a piece of value. It's usually going to play close to that ceiling of a 7, but if you don't get a kill and you don't really care about using your graveyard, you're not confident you can play the spells, just making it weird, it's all fine. It's nice that it gives you things that trigger the Spellgorger weird, that like it gives you power spells over time. Yeah, just a good way to top the curve in red. It is tied for best red uncommon. No, it's not. There's a better red uncommon. Tied for second best red uncommon. There's a Beldum here. It's a very good Pokemon. King, we might have time to work on that Delny deck really quick. I'm not positive. All right. Up next, Reckless Pyrosurfer. This is a good card. So in an aggressive deck, a 2-mana 2/2 with haste is pretty good. Landfall, it gains Battlecry until end of turn. So Battlecry is an anthem. This is a 2-mana 2/2 with haste that is an anthem. And you can also stack the landfalls. So like your fail case with this card is a 2-mana 2/2 haste that occasionally deals some extra points of damage later in the game. But you can set these situations up where you have, 3 other creatures in play, and then 3 fetch lands that you just don't bother cracking. Then you play a land, crack 3 fetches. Well, now all of your creatures get +4/+0 when this attacks. Other creatures, but still. Like, this is a very powerful and efficient attacker that is also an anthem for all of your decks that want to attack with multiple creatures. And there's a lot of them. Like, this makes your Eldrazi spawns hit harder. This makes your red-white energy tokens hit harder. It has haste on its own. It works well on the landfall decks. It does a lot of just powerful things that make your opponent dead. Like, it is a good aggressive card, but it's also a good combo card, and you can pull value out of it even in a ramp deck. All right. Reiterating Bolt. So this is a very, very strong payoff for the energy deck. 2 mana, deal 3 damage to a creature is not unplayable. It's totally fine. But if you have 3 energy, so this is one of the very few ways to spend energy that doesn't also produce energy. So it's 2 mana to deal 3 damage, or if you pay 3 energy, it's 2 mana to deal 6 damage. Or if you have 12 energy because you've been building up energy and haven't been spending it, then this is 2 mana to deal 12 damage. Like in the energy deck, this is the win con you're looking for because it's 2 mana to wipe your opponent's board and you can play other spells. Great in the energy deck. It's going to be a 4 anywhere that isn't producing a lot of energy. If you are building your deck around, it's going to be a 7. I gave it a 6. Just really, this is a 5.5. Because it's either reasonable removal with pretty high upside or a game-ending spell. Sarpedium Simulacrum. This one is getting a revisit. It's good in the affinity deck. It's very good in the affinity deck. Most aggressive decks aren't upset to have a 1 mana 1/1 with haste. And then the upside is like, if you draw this in the late game, so 1 mana 1/1 with haste on turn 1 is great. You will deal 3-4 points of damage with it over the course of the game. The fail case is that if you have a Raging Goblin in your deck, then late in the game, you draw it off the top, turn 10, whatever. It's terrible. You don't want that card. But this has the fail case of 5 mana, deal 4 damage to a creature, or just cashing it in later to kill a creature. I like it a lot, and it's going to be good in most aggressive decks and most artifact decks. It's not going to be amazing because it's 5 mana to deal 4 damage, but it's going to do its job. And the artifact deck really does just want 1 mana artifacts, things to suit up or put equipment on. It's nice. All right, Siege Smash. So pump spells with Split Second are really good. +3, we've been talking a lot about how like this card is bad. You need a way to give trample to make your giant Eldrazi kill them, but it's not free. This mitigates the downside of pump spells pretty well. So the downside of pump spells is if I play a Siege Smash and on my 3/3, and then you respond by dealing 3 damage to it, I'm shit out of luck. You can't respond to this. Split Second means that you can't respond to this. So I can safely cast this on my 2 mana 3/3, or on my 3 toughness creature, and you can't kill it. So it's much better than a normal combat trick. And being able to destroy an artifact is a nice little bit of upside. It does have diminishing returns, as all combat tricks do, but this is a good combat trick if you're a red aggressive deck. I think it's the only good combat trick if you're a red aggressive deck. This is the only good red combat trick if you are a red aggressive deck. And it's a good combat trick. Like, I'll play the first copy happily. I'll play a bunch of them if I'm drawing cards and I'm a strong deck. And incidental artifact destruction is great. Split Second makes this card good. Welcome back, Theo. It's really cool. Like, you'll hold up a Galvanic Discharge to kill your opponent's creature in response to them playing a pump spell, and you just can't. Skittering Precursor. This is good in the Eldrazi deck, but it's more about how many non-token permanents you have that you can sacrifice. Fetch lands are the obvious one. All of the common fetches trigger this to make a Scion. If this is a 3 mana 3/3 that makes 1 Scion, that is outclassed by a lot of the cards in the set. But this is a great splash in a Black-White Aristocrats deck. This is great in the Landfall deck because you have a lot of lands anyway, and this is great in some builds of the Artifact deck. Some of the builds of the Artifact deck just like incidentally sacrifice their artifacts. It's not free ever, and the fail case of a 3 mana 3/3 with Menace is nice. That's a 4. 3 mana 3/3 with Menace is a 4 in this set. 3 mana 3/3 with Menace, that makes 5 Eldrazi Scions is a 7. And you can get 5 Eldrazi Scions out of this card over time. It's very good. Skoa Embermage. This is getting a revisit. 6 mana for a 4/4 deals 4 to anything. It's pretty good. And it's a legendary creature that you don't mind having additional copies of. In general, you're going to be able to pitch to use Grandeur twice. You can pitch 2 Skoas and have 4 mountains. It's nice not being stuck with them. Like, you can play a few copies of this card, but you still can't overload on 6 drops in your red deck. And killing something when it comes into play is really good. Like, 6 mana 4/4 kill thing is really good. It's not a bad curve topper for the red aggro decks. So the red aggro decks will, yes, 6 seems like a lot, but so many cards just like incidentally generate a few Eldrazi Scions that you'll be trying to go wide. So if you make 5 Eldrazi Scions, this Reckless Pyrosurfer we looked at earlier is a great fail case because there's lots of little synergies. So this Reckless Pyrosurfer, this Skittering Precursor, you have your fetch lands that make Eldrazi that give Pyrosurfer Battlecry that attack and turn them all into 4/2s or 4/1s, and that's great. But like, you can't landfall triggers for the Precursor on the same time, so and grow them on the same turn, so it can be a little tough. So you will have a backup way to use your Eldrazi Scions in the form of Skoa Embermage. You can play a few giant creatures in your aggressive deck if you're making the Eldrazi spawns that you are also, because like the Eldrazi spawns let you go wide as plan A, and then plan B make mana for Skoa Embermage. And dealing 4 damage to your opponent when your 4/4 comes into play is really good. If you have a Skoa Embermage, 4 mountains, 2 Eldrazi spawns, 2 Skoa Embermages in hand, or 1 Skoa Embermage and a Raise Dead in hand, then you Skoa Embermage, deal 4, shoot him for 4, Raise Dead your Skoa Embermage, shoot him for 4 again. They're down 12 damage. If you didn't deal 8 damage in the first 5 turns of your aggro deck, your deck's bad. Yeah, it's a good curve topper for an aggro deck, and it's a good card most of the time. You don't need more copies of this card for it to be worth running. Smell the Charge Bug. Great in the energy deck, great in the affinity deck, bad everywhere else. When you are like, enough things need to break through. So this makes a lot of the otherwise bad cards solid. So like if we go back to, we talked about it a little bit yesterday when we were talking about the Slith. Hexgold Slith. So Hexgold Slith is a lot better with the Smelted Charger Bug. So is the Goblin. A lot of the things that need to hit to grow or to gain something are happy to gain Menace on attack. And a 2-mana 1/3 with Menace is good if you're growing it. A 2-mana 1/3 with Menace that gains 2 energy and can grant Menace is also solid. And this is also a good card in the affinity deck because this is a great creature to put a Cranial Ram on. So if you have a Cranial Ram and a Smelted Charger Bug, you get to attack with the Germ Menace. And if they have 2 creatures, they gotta block the big one. And then you just equip the Ram to the Charger Bug and do it again. But you don't have to pay energy that time. So this is a solid card in those decks because as a 2-mana 1/3, you don't need to grant Menace more than 1 most of the time. And in the energy deck is really good. But like, you have no interest in this in blue-red. It's bad at using the energy in blue-red. And it's bad at working with Eldrazi or modifying things in red-green. Like, giving your Eldrazi Menace is fine, but you have better 2-drops that you can play. All right, up next is what I think is the best red card, even though it's devoid. All right, compared to, so Siege Gang Commander is what this card is based on. That was a 5-mana 2/2 that made 3 goblins, and you could sacrifice the goblins to deal 2 damage to any target. The goblins were 1/1, so that was a 5-mana 5/5. But what Spawn Game Commander does is, A, this set is a lot better at making Eldrazi spawns than the Siege Game Commander sets were at making goblins. And B, you can block. So let's say your opponent attacks you with 3 big Eldrazi and you just made 3 Eldrazi spawns. You can sacrifice 2 of them for mana in order to use the 3rd one to shoot them. In the early access drafts, I played this deck a lot. I had, and this is a powerful finisher. Like, when you're making 10 Eldrazi spawns and you have, a 10/10 that just keeps getting chump blocked, you can sacrifice all of the Eldrazi spawns to shoot your opponent for 10. It's actually not unreasonable to just wait until you have 10 Eldrazi spawns and sacrifice 10 Eldrazi to deal 20 damage to your opponent. Like, it happens. You do need waste mana, but it produces waste because you make 3 Eldrazi spawns. This card is 4 bodies on 1 card, 3 burn spells on 1 card. I'm sorry, 4 burn spells on 1 card because it can sacrifice itself. It doesn't have to sacrifice an Eldrazi spawn, just an Eldrazi. This card is very good in this set, and it's a reason to go into Eldrazi. And if you don't end up in Eldrazi, you're just a red deck that if you're just a go wide deck, you're happy to play this card to make 4 bodies. If you're just a sacrifice deck, you're happy to play a sacrifice outlet. And the only place where it's kind of weak is in blue-red, but blue has a ton of Eldrazi, and then that's a 6. So yes, I think this is the best red card. Best red uncommon, there's a better red common. But yes, this card is fantastic. Oh, and you will probably see me take Spawn Game Commander over Galvanic Discharge. Galvanic Discharge is better, and that's wrong. I should be taking Galvanic Discharge over Spawn Gain Commander, but I really love playing with this card, so that is the wrong decision I am allowing myself to make for this set. All right, up next we have Sundering Eruption. This is also getting a revisit grade. I just didn't put it in the notes. Destroy target lands. Controlling may search its library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. That is unlikely to be useful. You don't want to pay 3 mana for fixing. There aren't enough good non-basic lands that you're happy to play this on your opponent, and the good non-basic lands are fixing, so your opponent can just get the color they need anyway. But Creature Without Flying Can't Block this turn is another good way to finish. So like, it is a better finisher. I gave it a 4 than the Meteoric Mace. It is a better finisher. It's a good way to close the game. And being a land is nice upside, but coming to play tapped is a drawback. This is a card that I'm very likely to bump up a little bit. But like, I only ever really want the first copy anyway, because I'm happy to play it as a land on turn 1, and I'm happy to use it to end the game. I mean, I guess it triggers landfall another time. I'm going to go ahead and raise the rating to a 5 and drop the difficulty. This is one that I've come back and forth a lot on. I feel like it does win the game in the right situation. Should be between 4 and a 5. Like, MDFCs are just powerful on their own. Alright, 3 cards left. Thriving Skyclaw. So this is a 4 mana 3/2 flyer. Makes 3 energy and attacks as a 4/3 flyer. Chances are you're not going to want to pour 6 energy into this unless you're breaking through a specific attacker. But the 4-drops are pretty weak in red in general. So like, this will still see play. Flyers are hard to come by in red. So you're fine curve topping with this. And you're not happy curve topping with it. You'd rather have a rare or an engine piece. Like, this is a weak way to spend and you gain energy. And it's a weak flyer, but it does all the things. It's good enough. A 4 mana 4/3 flyer is good. 4 mana 3/2 flyer is not. That's why it's medium. Unstable Amulet. So this card is very good. Most of the time, this is going to be 2 mana for an artifact that draws a card. So you have to pay 2 energy to exile a top card of your library, and it stays there. It's not until end of turn. It stays there until you cast it, or until you use the amulet again. So 2 mana for an artifact that draws a card is good in this set. We would play Prophetic Prism in this set because that's how Affinity works. Most of the time, this is going to be 2 mana, draw a card that pings. You're happy in an aggressive deck, is a reasonable control card. You get to spend your later energy to draw more cards, so it's good in the energy decks. In Affinity, this is a 7. Like, Affinity once cantrip artifacts, and Affinity makes incidental energy just every once in a while, and you're happy to be able to turn that energy into a fresh card with the amulet. It kind of has diminishing returns, but not really, because if you have 2 amulets, you're just using the amulets to close out the game. Like, the damage adds up pretty fast if you're spending a lot of energy into it. Just a powerful way to generate more cards for red. And finally, we have Void Pouncer. This needs to come down because it's you have better 2-drops available in the energy deck, and in Affinity, it's a great, more aggressive Eldrazi, and the ability to pay. This is only good when both modes are going to be relevant for you, because a 2 mana 3/1 is fine. A 5 mana 5/3 with trample and haste is very good. So you have to be able to cast this with the kicker for it to be a good card for you. But then it's a very good card for you, and you'll be pretty happy to play with it. That is gonna do it for today. Yep, it is Mishra's Juggernaut that doesn't have to attack. It's a good card. All right, do we have any questions about the red cards or the blue cards? I know we had a lot of people arrive late. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. I'm going to get some water, and then I'm also going to check and see how much time I have to do stuff. And I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Does anyone have any questions? The spreadsheet is not done, Domino. We still have 2 whole colors left to go. I posted all on the Discord, so if you want that kind of information, I do the announcements whenever that stuff goes up, and it all goes on the Discord. Nah, so Theo, the draw 3 archetype is control. Like, drawing 3 is just a bonus. There's actually hardly any triggers for drawing 3. So, like, these are the draw 3 payoffs. Demon Furier is a great draw 3 payoff because it's not really draw 3. If you draw 3 cards this turn, it's only 1 mana. I also disagree with you that OTJ was mid. I consider that to be an all-timer. But yeah, Demon Furier is the draw 3 payoff. Like, this is what you want for drawing cards. And the much better cards are like Emrakul's Messenger, which is just draw 2, which means that if you made 20 clues, then you get to do that every turn. Yeah, the only cards that say when you draw your 3rd card in a turn on it are Sneaky Snacker, and there's like 2 black cards. Like, it's not really a draw 3 archetype, like, but it's a nice... Blue-black is a control archetype. You are a control deck that happens to draw 3 cards every once in a while. But there's some cool things you can do, like Tamio meets a Story Circle in order to not die. Very good. All right. So that is going to be it for this stream. I'll announce it soon, but I might come back and finish tonight. I have a previous engagement at 6:30, but I would really like to finish this, and I'm not going to have time tomorrow. And it's too hot in my room right now. It's my friend's birthday. It's my roommate's birthday, and I'm letting her use the AC unit. But I'm taking it back later. And for now, I'm going to let it cool down a bit and then finish the set review. All right, I'm either going to finish the set review tonight, tomorrow morning, or Sunday evening, and I will announce that tonight. It is not a hot date. It is birthday things. But I'm going to go celebrate a little bit, and then I'm going to try and come back later tonight. Yeah. That's where we're at. Okay. So let's see who's on that we can raid. I will announce my timing late in a bit. I might not have the energy to come back tonight, although it would be the best to do. If I am able, tomorrow morning is the most likely, right? Let's see. It would have to be at like 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Is that feasible? It might be. We'll see. I'll announce tonight when I'm doing the last 2 colors. I'm about halfway done with black, and I finished green.